Emily, I'm guessing we should wait a couple more minutes before calling it to order.
Yeah, we
Did
don't
you
have.
hear? Yeah, did you hear from anybody that they weren't making it today?
Yeah, I heard from Heidi that she had something come up last minute. That's the only person I heard from. I did hear from Jerry that she will be here. Oh, Paul's here. Paul, we're gonna move you to panelist and say with Jordan. Oh, Will's here. Hi, Will.
Hello.
Okay, Paul's been promoted. Hi, Jordan.
Hey, nice to see everybody.
Good to see you too. I'm thinking that we should
Go ahead and
start with things that we don't need a quorum for.
Okay.
Just given how much we have to cover tonight.
Do you want to start with the land acknowledgement?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm starting tonight with a land acknowledgement that we as members of the housing system in Missoula acknowledge that we are in the homelands of the Salish and Kalispel people. And today we offer our respect for their history and culture, for their ancient and continuing presence in this landscape, and for the path they've shown us in caring for this place for generations to come. And we also recognize the ways in which systems of government have contributed to the disconnection of Indigenous peoples from these lands and their families, culture, and heritage. It's our responsibility as individuals and as a collective to acknowledge the white supremacist culture underlying our practices and to be accountable to demanding respect for tribal sovereignty and Indigenous cultures and the needs and perspectives of Indigenous peoples. And as a committee, as the committee continues to acknowledge with deep gratitude this land, may we also move toward action in redistributing power and resources to communities directly harmed by historical and current practices of colonization, to embrace conversations and behavior that lead to structural changes.
Thank you. It looks like we have 7 members, and I think that is a quorum.
Yep.
So we'll go ahead and call to order and do introductions. I'm Katie Carlson, the chair.
Do you want to call on someone?
Christine.
I'm Christine Littig. I'm a community member appointed by the county commissioners, and I go by the pronouns of she, her, hers. Will?
Will Seaburn, community member, he, him pronouns. How about Paul?
Sure. Paul Harrington, representative of the financial industry appointed by City Council. Go by he, him. How about Lori?
Sure. Lori Davidson. I'm the director of the Missoula Housing Authority. Go by the pronouns she, her. Let's see. Sorry, I can't see who's on here. Hold on a second. Mayor Engen.
Oh, thanks, Lori. I'm John Engen, Mayor of the City of Missoula. My pronouns are he and him. I would love to be called John. And how about Riley?
Hello, my name is Riley Jacobson. He has pronouns. I am the first alternate and co-chair for the committee. And who hasn't gone? Jordan?
Hey, good evening. I'm Jordan Lyons. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm the housing specialist at Missoula County. Just a guest here this evening to make a presentation. Zoe, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jordan. Hi, my name is Zoe Walters, and I'm an admin with Community Planning, Development, and Innovation. And did we want to go and do roll call as well?
Yeah, that's great.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay, so if you could just let me know that you're present, I will mark you in. John Engen,
Present.
Lori Davidson.
Yes, here.
Okay, and Heidi West is absent. Paul Herendine,
Present.
Laura Bird. Don't see Laura. Katie Carlson,
Here.
Will Seaburn,
Present.
Jerry Stiffarm. Don't see Jerry. Misty Brown. Misty's not here. Christine Littig,
Here.
Riley Jacobson,
Present.
and Bobby Weston. I don't see Bobby. So looks like eScribe is saying we do have a quorum. Yep, so that is roll call.
Hey Zoe, when I started screen sharing, I lost the ability to see the panelists and attendees. So if anyone's stuck in attendees, can you please move them over?
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Okay, so then should we move on to approval of minutes for September and October? Did everybody get it?
Oh, I was gonna make a motion, but
Okay.
is that in order?
Yes, thank
I
you.
move we approve the September and October meeting minutes.
Great. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Unless there's any further discussion, all those in favor say aye.
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 All those opposed say nay. And minutes are approved. Okay, so moving on. Sorry, Emily, did you want to go over norms?
Oh, I left them up, so I think it's okay.
Okay, great. And then public comment. Is there any public comments?
Doesn't look like it.
Okay.
Looks like Jerry just joined as well, and we do have a second set of minutes from October to approve as well.
Oh, was
wait.
the motion for September and October or just for September?
Will's motion was for both.
Yep.
Oh, got it. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Okay, moving on to fiscal reports.
We don't have any tonight.
Okay. So then, Emily, do you want to move on to what you wanted to
Yeah.
go over the
So-
action items?
Yep. So in our first action item tonight, thanks, Katie. Our first action item tonight is actually first we have a presentation from Jordan Lyons from Missoula County about the Housing Action Plan. So that's first. Jordan, I have your presentation up, or we can make you can screen share.
I updated the chart in it, so if I can screen share that would be great.
Great.
All right. Well, hey, thank you so much for having me tonight. Is everybody seeing my PowerPoint?
Not yet.
One sec here. Let me try that again. How about now?
Yes, sir.
All right, great. Well, yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. And I just wanted to update this group a little bit about Missoula County's draft housing action plan, Breaking Ground, and just give you a little bit of information on it and some info I thought was pertinent for this group, and then tell you a little bit about how you can participate. So let's see. So we all know, this group certainly knows that housing is a really complex, difficult problem. and it's not something that lends itself to answers from on high or from some mathematical formula. It's something when we developed this housing action plan, we knew we really had to base this on Missoula County's unique needs and get a lot of community input to generate the plan. So we included questions about housing on our community needs assessment, which had 887 responses. We put together a steering committee that included developers, nonprofits, and community leaders from the communities all over Missoula County. And we did a lot of stakeholder engagement. We did a lot of one-on-one interviews and group meetings with different stakeholders. And also, I just want to mention too, we're really fortunate that we were really able to build on the city's a place to call home housing policy and great data from the Missoula Organization of Realtors. So really grateful for those resources as a starting place, as well as the city and the county's growth policies. So taking in all that data and doing all those stakeholder interviews, the conditions we found in the draft housing action plan are that Missoula County has a shortage of about 2,400 units right now. And that shortage is kind of the upstream cause of all these different housing issues we see, of the really high home prices, high rents, and low vacancy. And then the other thing we found is that the market will not produce enough units to meet demand in the near term. So it's not really, it won't resolve the issue to just kind of say hands off, let the market do its thing. And so given that context and Missoula County's unique powers and constraints, we came up with 3 big goals around housing. And so goal number 1 was to use the county's toolkit to increase the housing supply. And so that's tools like zoning, developing infrastructure, and using county lands for affordable housing. And the second was to provide more funding for programs to help people access and stay in stable housing. So, given that housing shortage, that doesn't affect us all equally. And it's much more difficult for people with lower incomes to afford their housing than people with higher incomes. So we really have to make that a priority. And the third goal is just kind of an acknowledgement that the county, the county has some powers and some resources, but we certainly can't do it alone. And we need to partner with the city, housing nonprofits, and developers and other stakeholders to improve policy around housing. So, and if you take a look at the draft plan, you'll see many different actions under each of these goals. And one that I just kind of wanted to zoom in on for this group, something that's been the subject of a lot of discussion from the commissioners and other people in the community, is just looking at the city's trust fund and thinking, should Missoula County have a trust fund? Should Missoula County partner with the city to make a city-county trust fund? And so that's kind of where we landed on it, is not one specific course of action right now, but to explore the development of a city-county trust fund. And the questions we would kind of want to answer if we went down that path would be, how much would the county contribute to it? Another question might be, where should projects or programs supported by the county be located? I'm sure a lot of you know this, that Missoula County, we're in a unique situation where the county is geographically very large, but about 2/3 of all the residents of Missoula County live in the city, and it's the only incorporated city in Missoula County. So it makes for a really interesting jurisdiction for Missoula County. And the third example of a question would be, how does the governance of the fund make room for the county? So those would just be some kind of considerations. And as we move towards implementing this plan, we'll be exploring that more. And we are currently getting public feedback on the plan. And I did want to share that we are getting public feedback, most of our feedback is coming through a questionnaire people are filling out that asks, it gives them an opportunity to write some responses, but it has some quantitative questions too about how important they think the different recommendations are. And so, this is the recommendation for the trust fund: seek new locally controlled funding sources to build dedicated affordable homes. And this has 68 responses. And you can see, the largest block is said very important, and followed by somewhat important. Not important was about 19%. And then a couple of people said, I'm not sure. And I'll just mention this one thing. This looks a little different than what is in your packet because I had more responses now, so I updated it. But I think the general drift is the same. And, the vast majority said very or somewhat important. Just to give you some context, though, it was one of the higher not important. The only one that more people said was not important was studying the impact of vacation rentals. So I just wanted to put that out there. That's kind of some preliminary public feedback on that. And then we'll see a lot more once we get in and analyze the written comments. And just to let you know, next steps for this document, the action plan, we're pursuing adopting it as an issue plan, attaching it to Missoula County's growth policy. And so where we're at in that cycle is collecting feedback from the public until November 12th. I'll show you the link at the end of the presentation where you can leave a comment. And we will incorporate that and create an updated public hearing draft that will go before the planning board on December 7th for their consideration. And based on what comes out of the planning board, we'll go to the Board of County Commissioners scheduled for January 13th for their consideration. And the more we hear from you all, the better the plan is going to be. So I would really encourage folks in this group who are so dialed into this issue to check out the plan, give it a read, and leave us a comment. You can go to http://missoula.co/housing, and you can find the full plan there and fill out the questionnaire. You can also send in a comment by email. My email address is jlyons@missoulacounty.us, or feel free to give a call on the phone to 406-258-3444. So that's the real short version of my presentation. But if any of you have questions or comments, I'd love to engage. And I know I went fast, so let me know. Yes, John.
Hey, Jordan, thanks very much for the presentation. Just wanted to answer one of the questions with regard to how much the county should contribute. A lot.
All right. Good deal. Is that your...
Yeah, nice work. Pardon me, for the sake of the committee and to a lesser degree for my sake, could you talk a little bit about the interaction you've had with city staff as a function of developing plan and making sure that we're like in so many other arenas collaborating?
Yeah, definitely. So we were really lucky to have a lot of great support from city staff. So Emily Harris-Shears was on our steering committee, so it was really great to have her and her input. She gave a lot of really great technical input, in particular on that recommendation about the housing trust fund or affordable housing trust fund, but just a lot of great input throughout the plan. And we keep a regular meeting with staff over there and CPDI, and then we also, our consultants, one of the stakeholders they interviewed was Montana James. So we tried to really cover our bases and get that view represented. And, that trust fund recommendation is a big one vis-a-vis the city. There's also, especially in goal 1, there's like quite a bit because there's a lot about planning and zoning and a lot about, Missoula's, urban area, urban fringe, and developing infrastructure there. So, so definitely city is a super important partner, and hopefully you all feel like you have, it's a really good representation of how you'd like us to move forward together, and we welcome any additional feedback on it too.
Well, thank you very much. Had no doubt, but wanted to hear and have others here as well. So thanks, Jordan. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Paul, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks. So just so I understand, the process you're working on currently, the end goal of this is going to be the county housing plan, and what's the timeline look like on that?
So the timeline for the adoption of it is here, and then the time frame of the plan itself is 3 years. So we're kind of on these goals, we're kind of looking out 3 years, and a lot of it is setting up, anticipating there will be, a successor to this plan that adapts to existing conditions and kind of builds on it.
Right. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the way the plan will get implemented on the ground. I know as soon as you start talking about changes to zoning or funding mechanisms for a trust fund, when those actually go to get implemented, all of a sudden that's going to be quite contentious. And so I wonder if you could talk a little bit about how that will actually come into practice.
Sure. So my position is really kind of transitioning from developing this plan to implementing it. And a lot of that will be, and obviously in my position, I do not have the technical expertise or the legal authority to effect a lot of these changes. So a lot of my job is kind of corralling all those resources that the county has to make those changes. And I hope that the way that our process with this has enough stakeholder engagement baked in that we're not super surprised to find to have find a 180 from what we thought. But I think that's where on some of the recommendations, I think we did a pretty good job of reaching really diverse folks all over the county. And there's so many, every community has such a different perspective on these issues and things like that in Missoula County. So you'll see in there that some actions are very definite, we just need to do this, bing, 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 bing. And some of them are explore this, find out if we can do this. Another one that's definitely explore this issue is there is one also about bonding and things like that. I mean, I think we're all just kind of watching, I know that in Bozeman, a place with maybe even more housing challenges than we have, they just voted down their bond for affordable housing. So we want to take all that into account as we move forward, all those changing conditions and more newer information that we have.
Yeah. I mean, I guess that's kind of my concern, because if it does come time to propose a zoning change, I mean, you can do a lot of exploration, but I feel like I could probably tell you what's going to happen. And there's going to be a vocal group of people who are dead set against it. And I'm wondering how the recommendations will actually get put into practice at that point.
Yeah, and Missoula County is updating our zoning code right now, actually. So, and I mean, I think they have I think they have a really robust public process, and they'll be coming out with a new version of that in the spring. So I mean, that's happening, and it won't. You're right. It's a political process, and there are people who are opposed to zoning regulations, but I mean that it is moving forward, and there are going to be zoning changes. So I mean that's in process, and my role in that has been more to kind of give a little insight from housing world for things like what kinds of incentives do we want to develop affordable housing. But great questions. Yes, Christine.
Yeah, Jordan, thank you. I had a lot of catching up to do because I missed our last meeting. And so there was a lot of reading this last week to try and bring myself up to speed. But I'm wondering when you're communicating 2,400 housing units, are those units inclusive of catching up on our vacancy rates, or is it specific to housing units for
So
the, yeah, go ahead.
yeah. So the way that we came to that number, so that's a snapshot in time that is based on 2019. So the census data is really challenging to use from 2020, just due to the pandemic and everything going on. A lot of people feel like it's like not very reliable. So it's 2019 data, and basically where we come to that is the ratio of housing units in Missoula County to households. And so, you need to have an affordable, efficient housing marketplace. You need more housing units than households, and we have a few more, but not enough. So that's where that's kind of where that shortage idea comes from.
Thank you. I appreciate that clarification.
Jordan, thanks. This is a great summary of the hard work that you've been doing and leading. Are there any other questions for Jordan?
Well, thank you
Okay.
for having me. Feel free to reach out. Thank you.
Good to see you.
You too.
See ya. Okay. Well, I don't know if you're staying. You're more than welcome to stay. I said see you, but you don't have to leave, Jordan. Okay. So we're going to move on. Share this again. So I wanted to provide time for a debrief of the innovation round funding recommendation that I shared by email a few weeks ago. And the recommendation that is moving forward through council right now through a public hearing is to fully fund United Way's Centralized Housing Solutions Fund for their full request of $26,250. And the scoring committee that reviewed these applications did not recommend the other two applications for funding at this time. And their recommendation is to return the remaining $273,750. You can tell I've done this presentation a few times, to the trust fund balance and to award it in the unified application round, which will be released in this winter. And I just wanted to provide some time for you all to ask questions and debrief that. And I think it certainly informs the allocation plan that you're doing for the remainder of this meeting tonight. So I also just wanted to ask or share a recommendation that, given the bulk of our time is prioritized for the allocation plan, which is of course informed by this, I want to propose that I don't go through all of the slides that I shared prior to the meeting and assume that you had a chance to review them, so that we can prioritize the time we have right now for your questions and for the debrief and discussion. Does that work for everyone, or would it be helpful to run through a quick overview of how the decision was arrived at? Okay, great. I'm seeing only Paul shaking his head, but oh, Jerry too. Okay, great. So we're going to move forward and assume that the head shaking means you're good with us moving on to discussion. So I'll just open it up, and if there are questions or if there's context that's helpful to provide, you can let me know. Will?
Sorry if I missed this in one of the slides, but I think one of the applications was from Homeward for modular homes. And I know that was a project they sought funding for a few years ago when I was still at the city. I actually not sure how that project turned out. So I was just curious, what was the reason for rejecting that one? And then also just generally, because I do think that could help inform allocation plan discussions, because I think there's several buckets to think about. There's the rental, there's the home ownership, there's the counseling, and I think it's preservation. And obviously, modular home ownership, that's a little bit lower cost, so arguably we could make a bigger dent there. But just curious, what we learned either from the prior project or this application that didn't make it a good fit for funding?
Yeah, great question. Thanks. I want to clarify that the applicant was actually Habitat for Humanity, not Homeward. So I think that's important just to frame. And then, overall, the impression of that project, just generally, there were a lot of strengths to that project that you're elevating, Will, about the low cost, the readiness that they're already built. It's a creative way to provide housing. But ultimately, the scoring committee discussed and decided that it just wasn't ready, to be honest. So the project had a plan for 2 of the modular structures. And then the recommendation was kind of like, we'll make a plan for the remaining 3. And given that Homeward has had a challenge in placing these units or these structures, we felt that it needed a more robust plan for an application, that it needed to be more detailed and planned out to make an investment of that size. The scoring committee did review 3 options that they came up with during the discussion. And one of them included partial funding for that. And ultimately, they voted on the way they wanted to proceed. And through discussion and the vote, they decided not to proceed that way. So what we offered both applicants who are not recommended for funding at this time was we provided feedback and then offered a one-on-one debrief with me to go over the application. Habitat did take me up on that, and Homeward joined them as well. And we did that on Monday and went through each section of the application, the score that they received as an aggregate of the average that they received from the scoring committee, the strengths of the section that was scored, and then also the opportunities or areas of concern. So really to ultimately encourage them to apply for funding in the next round when there's a more concrete plan for those remaining 3 structures.
Okay, thank you. So it sounds like project readiness was probably the biggest thing. Can you, as much as you can share, Emily, just because I'm a little out of the loop on it, like with the prior projects that the city's funded through either like home or CDBG, something like that on these modular homes, what have they been successful in it? And it kind of sounds like maybe they haven't, and like what have been the roadblocks to it? And you can keep it like super high level. I'm just looking for like broad strokes that might help inform our subsequent conversation.
Yeah, I wasn't here for this project's implementation, but from what I understand, they have been successful in placing 6 of the structures through the Montana Street Homes project, and they purchased the 11 structures. And so when they placed the first 6, they've been working to place them. But as you can imagine, with land costs and finding land and all of those pieces have been a challenge for them. And they've been working hard to do that, but it just hasn't really panned out. So this partnership that they proposed with Habitat would allow them to basically transfer the ownership to Habitat, and then Habitat has a parcel in East Missoula where they would have placed the first 2 structures.
Got it.
And then they were unsure. They recommended either an ADU strategy or a like finding new parcels for the sale for home ownership for the remaining 3. And the feedback from the scoring committee was decide which is it ADUs or is it home ownership for all 5 of the structures. And then, but that for an application, it needed to have that concrete detail in there for them to feel comfortable with the award.
So site control is probably the other key element that
for this project, that was one of the concerns. And then there were also just questions about potential displacement for homeowners that are people who are currently living on the parcel. And it turned out that that's not a concern, but that ultimately it needed to be strengthened in the application, how it was addressed.
Okay, that's super helpful. Thanks for going through that detail.
And I just want to name that Zoe and Kendra, who's an attendee, were both members of the scoring committee. So if I'm missing anything or misreflecting it, then both of you are welcome to comment and share as well. What other questions are there? Paul?
Yeah, thank you. So thanks for passing this on, and certainly thanks to the selection committee for doing the hard work of sorting through these. I know it takes a lot of time and diligence, and I really appreciate the work they did, and certainly no quibbles with the decisions that they made. Stepping back and looking at this from kind of a high level, Missoula is in the midst of a affordable housing crisis. And in this funding round, we made $300,000 available and allocated less than 10%. And to my mind, that's a good learning experience, but not a success. It's hard to imagine that additional money just couldn't find a good use out there in the community, given what we're seeing right now. So I'm wondering, in the perspective of the committee, what did work, what didn't work, and what can we do in the future to be sure that this money that we have generously can be put to good use?
Paul, do you mean for the committee members to respond to that, or do you want me to respond?
I think anybody's perspectives would be
Okay,
valuable.
great.
Certainly, yeah.
Can I start? And then John, can I start, or do you want to start?
So you go ahead, Emily. Thanks.
Thanks, Paul. This is a really good question, something that we obviously talked about too. And we, did talk about that urgency component a lot in the scoring committee, and ultimately felt that these projects just needed to answer some of those key questions in order to feel confident in the award. I think in the future rounds, one of the pieces that will help entice projects is one, there will be a larger allocation available. So I think that's one thing, is that if your project was potentially needing more than 300,000, that may have stopped you from applying. I also think that we have a plan to, this was intentionally a fast round, and it was intentionally a fast round to get some money out the door, but also to test our processes and start to build relationships with partners in the community, which we absolutely did. And so from that, I would like to say I feel it's a success. Well, I know that it's not reaching the goal of putting all of the money out in the community, but we will have that money available to use in the next round. The other piece I just want to say is that in the unified round, we give more notice so people know it's coming. It's also, we'll start to post materials and things like that in December, and the round will fully open in February. So partners will have more access to the information than they did in this round. And that would be the same in the proposed second round that was in the allocation plan. So I think that also will start to build kind of this momentum of people knowing that they can apply. So those are my kind of key things. John, do you want to go next?
Sure, thank you, and it's a great question, Paul. And I think the urgency is can be a little overwhelming here. And I had the good fortune to have a conversation with Emily yesterday, and I've had conversations with other staff again, because we want to get this money out the door. Often the quality of the application is a great preview of the quality of the project, and frankly our ability to manage that project and that grant over time. And one of the things that can be concerning is if the application isn't quite dialed in, the management and ultimately the success of the project is more challenging. And because this was a fast round, and because the fact of the matter is everything we're doing here is an experiment, we're gonna trot some stuff out, and we're going to test our processes. I think this is one of those tests. But I also think that we're going to provide some degree of, I mean, we do have limited capacity, and that's a thing to remember. As we work to get this money out the door, we have limited ability. We can't, for example, complete a grant for an applicant, and we're pretty hard pressed, given all of the other work that's going on, to really provide a great deal of technical assistance. So a couple of things that we can certainly look at, and I think what Emily and staff are doing are, I believe there's yet another. I've had a conversation with an applicant, an unsuccessful applicant. Emily has had a conversation. I believe there's yet another conversation to be had. So I think we're following up, trying to help these applicants understand what the issues are. It doesn't feel like the stakes are particularly high here, but one bad grant out the door tends to erode confidence in the entire program. And if we're going to continue to robustly fund this endeavor, we have to have community trust as well. And so staff has a lot on its shoulders here. There's a lot riding on these decisions, even though the dollar amounts aren't huge. And then the second thing is we'll be back with another round here in really short order. And I think that will, I think there will be enough interest in that second round that every applicant is going to have to up their game. So I don't think the standard is going to fall here. And I think the competition is going to get stiffer. So, I think what we're asking our partners in the community to do is absolutely bring their A game so that everyone can be confident that the project is viable and that the project will be complete and the project will meet the goals of this committee and more broadly our community's goals as stated in our policies.
We'll also have in the unified round a pre-application. So we will provide technical assistance between the pre-application and the final application being submitted. And so that is also something different that we clearly didn't do in this round, partly because we wanted to test it and it is necessary. So that's also something, Paul, that I think one way that we can start to generate more interest too is through that pre-technical assistance. And then Christine, I saw your hand, and then Will.
Thank you, John and Emily, for rounding out all probably a series of questions that we may have each had in your responses. So I appreciate you taking the time to do that and being really thorough. I was curious, and again, feeling like I'm in a place of catching up. Did the Centralized Housing Solutions Fund request more than what we gave them? Okay, and in your answer being no, is there the possibility that this, the Centralized Housing Solutions Fund will continue to request on like a biannual basis? Okay, you're nodding yes.
I think that's very possible. And that's something we talked about in the scoring committee, is that there's a difference in, well, we haven't set a policy about programs or projects coming back for future funding. And also there's a difference between the consumer housing education, consumer housing programs that are really programs and that are pretty much annual. And we expect that a tenant education program or centralized solutions fund might come back for multiple rounds, where a project might be a one-time request or a two-time request or something like that, but it's really to build or acquire or to put something in the community, where the consumer housing projects are continuous, and so they may seek funding again. And it's actually one of the only funding sources now that we've done some narrowing down of how we're going to prioritize home and CDBG dollars. And so we expect that will be a way that people are accessing that resource.
Thank you.
Will?
Thanks. I was wondering, well, first of all, like, I think I'm really sympathetic to the notion that this was like a quicker notification round. And like, if you don't have a project that's kind of ready to go in the next couple of weeks that you can apply for. So I'm, I guess, cautiously optimistic that we'll see more applicants in the next round. But I just had a question, Emily, or for anyone else. Is part of the issue here potentially just we don't have a deep enough bench in terms of developer capacity here who can take on this type of project, who has the staff, who knows how to administer this project, knows how to manage grant reporting, all that sort of stuff. And one thing I think about is, I know this is a specific home program definition, but like the Community Housing Development Organization, the CHODO, I think we have two of those who kind of meet those qualifications around capacity and community representation, things like that. And just wondering if we've given any thought to like, how could we deepen the bench so we're not just reliant on one or two organizations to apply for funding every year, but like there's more people who might have a project ready to go at any given time.
That's a great question. I think one of the ways we deepen the bench through the Affordable Housing Trust Fund is making awards and loans available, grants and loans available to both for and nonprofit developers. And then I think also the development that we're in process of our voluntary incentives program is another way that we deepen the bench. And I don't know, I would be interested to hear from others about that capacity component, but I know that I've heard from other I've heard from partners who do plan to apply in the next round. So I think that's something, but I see Lori has an answer to or a comment.
Yeah, thanks, Emily. I think actually Missoula has a lot of developers who are actively doing projects, both for-profit and nonprofit. I can tell you as someone who's involved in two projects, then we do plan to apply in the next funding round. We didn't apply for the innovation round because we were sort of under the impression that those funds were, that there were people already going for those funds and we were going to wait for the larger funding round to come through. So, because we aren't, there's no pressing need right now, we can wait. So we made a conscious decision not to apply in the innovation round, but we will be applying in the next round. So I think it's not so much a question of not having developer capacity, because I think we have a lot of that. And if you look at the applications that go into the state for the LIHTC programs, we have developers from out of state and in-state and for-profit and nonprofit. There's a limit to how many will get funded in Missoula, so that's a little bit of a limitation there. But we have people actively using home and CDBG, and they will, I think you're going to see a lot more applications in this next funding round is what I think, just because there's a lot more money involved and the timing will be right. So I'm not so much thinking as it's a capacity issue as it's a timing issue and an issue of how much funding is available. We're all really careful not to step on each other's toes. We have a lot of communication amongst ourselves. And so if we think someone's going to go in for funding on this round, then we'll say, oh, we can wait until the next round. We don't need to. And then if they decide not to apply, then you've got money left on the table. So lots of factors here in this first innovation round. And I'm, you know, I wouldn't so much look at it as a failure as just a matter of timing and, well, mostly of timing, I guess, is my thought on it.
Thanks for that, Lori. I'll just close with 2 comments then. I'm sure everyone's already on top of this, but it seems like anyone who's applying for state tax credits should be like sent an email with our funding process and say, hey, consider Missoula for your next application. And then I don't know how we solve for like the deference that applicants want to provide other than maybe communicating like, look, if you've got a good idea, submit it. Ultimately, that's what the scoring committee is there for, to determine what's going to be most valuable. But I recognize kind of the desire to defer to someone if they're really itching to get a project off the ground, but maybe somehow communicating that.
Yeah, communication, more communication is always helpful.
Mhm. So are there any other questions or feedback? Maybe people we haven't heard from yet? All right, well, not seeing any, I'm going to recommend that we move on to the allocation plan. I'm so excited. We're here. Okay, so I'll just also offer that if you have other recommendations for how to do outreach or others, you can absolutely bring them to the meeting. Just a reminder that you can always recommend agenda items, but you can also, it's an open invitation to reach out to me. And if you have questions that you feel still need to be answered or anything like that, I'm always available. Okay, so tonight we're moving on to the allocation plan. And really excited about this, as I just shared, because this will give us a lot more insight and overview of how to run the next round and the next rounds for this year. So the goals for this meeting tonight for the remaining time are for you to identify the reserve balance for 2022, to allocate funding to the activity areas, and then set funding and activity priorities. And I'm going to switch over to a different document. So you have the draft allocation plan that I made and sent to you. And I just really want to appreciate the discussion in the October meeting around what you'd like to see and how this might work as a document. I hope that this meets the expectations of the discussion that we had. So I'm not going to go through every slide because I know that you've had a chance to review it, but I want to start with the award cycle. So I, following our conversations that we've had really since the beginning of the establishment of this oversight committee about timing of competitive cycles and how to appropriately administer the reserve balance. I wrote a draft award cycle policy and process for you to have something to start from and react to. And I just want to name too, in case this isn't clear, we started the part of what informed this policy is that the innovation round took us and is not finished yet and will take us about 5 months to administer. So thinking about the reality, 4 to 5 months. So thinking about the reality of how many cycles we can legitimately run in a funding year. And then also what to do with the award balance or the reserve balance, excuse me. I know that we talked about opening an award, a competitive cycle for the reserve balance. And we're really learning through this test phase that really won't be possible to do with the, with what we talked about of like a community partner saying, hey, I have an urgent need, I need to run a project. It will not be feasible to run a competitive cycle because we may be in the middle of a competitive cycle and maybe they've missed it or something like that. So this reserve balance recommendation award cycle recommendation that I've written as a draft includes to administer 2 competitive award cycles per year, the unified round, which will be in the winter, and then a summer round, which we'll just call the Affordable Housing Trust Fund round because it will only have those funds. And then the reserve balance would be set by you, the Resident Oversight Committee. I proposed a max 20% of the available balance to be reserved annually, but that's up for discussion with you all. And then the reserve balance would be held for projects that are essentially initiated by the city. That doesn't mean that a partner can't also, come to us and begin that discussion, but most likely they would be reserved for urgent acquisitions. So things that are not in the award cycle timeframe, but would otherwise be a miss to the community. And the Affordable Housing Resident Oversight Committee, you all would oversee the reserve balance and vote on the reserve recommendations. So in my vision, essentially when we get a reserve balance request or the city initiates one, then we would bring it to you. You would need to have a meeting and review that. Depending on the time frame, we may have to ask you to do an emergency meeting if it's outside of your cycle, just given the nature and urgency of acquisitions and things like that. And then you would have an up-down vote on the proposal that's at hand. So that is the recommended policy that I wanted to share. What questions or feedback do you have or recommendations for additions? Yep, Will.
I'm just love to hear just understanding that this process for the reserve balance would be different than what the process is normally because we don't actually approve projects. And so what's the rationale why this would go to this committee and not like to council, for example?
Oh, good question. So, well, it would be out of scope, I think, from the structure to have it go to council rather than to go to the oversight committee. So we don't have, it's not it's not in the ordinance that you can't oversee or make funding decisions. It's just that that's how we set up the process and delineation of roles. So this doesn't change anything in the ordinance or anything like that. So really in my mind and what we discussed in developing this is that the scope should be that it would come to you all before it would go to something like council. It may ultimately go to council for approval through the regular process, but rather than running it through a scoring committee, which we may not be able to pull together and things like that, you're a body that oversees the trust fund and also understands the policy alignment, understands you set the allocation plan. And so it seems like a fair role for you to play.
So like in this case, we'd be substituting for the review committee, essentially, since there'd be no one else who'd do like the review of the application like we would in normal order.
Yeah, that's the recommendation, and it wouldn't be a full application. It would be a proposal that would be shared with you about the project and the cost and all of those pieces. And then you would do a vote on that in this like special, maybe at times a special committee meeting.
Okay.
I saw John and then Katie.
Pardon me, thanks. I just thought I'd throw out an example for the committee of something that might be urgent. So low-income housing tax credit project reaches the end of its affordability period and is suddenly on the market. And if it is not purchased by someone like us or like the city or the city and a partner, that affordability will be lost. Those units all go back to market rate, et cetera. So I think of that as an example of one of these urgent items. I would suggest that a circumstance like the Bridge Apartments, for example, were that not in an urban renewal district where we had resources to purchase and preserve that remarkably affordable housing, we'd have lost out, and that's another example of an urgent opportunity. And ultimately, council is going to make these decisions, but they're going to rely heavily on the recommendations from this committee. And in this case, when you're skipping through the scoring process, I think the committee's judgment will bear extra weight as council's making a decision.
I guess I'm curious why we would limit it just to city-initiated projects as opposed to having any individual who could come and apply for emergency and go through the same process that the city would go through for an emergency use.
Yeah, that's a great question. Part of what we felt by doing that is that there's still that fairness piece of like, if you're not applying in the unified round or the other rounds. And so what we're envisioning is like, we want everyone to bring their biggest projects to the competitive cycles. And then we were thinking about the fairness of projects that are outside of that competitive cycle being at least initiated or endorsed by the city. So maybe it's better to say something like city endorsed projects or something like that. But that was some of our decision around that, was that we don't want a partner to be skipping over the competitive cycle. We want them to participate in the competitive cycle. And we know that this will be really held for, and that's how we've always talked about the reserve balances, those kind of urgent acquisitions. And so at least bringing them to us, and then we would bring them through. So does that help or make sense?
Yeah, I guess I just think like there's probably a lot of people out there that have the emergency issues that come up, and the city can also apply through the normal process, right?
Well, I want to clarify, the city doesn't want to run these projects, and we don't want funding for these pieces. We want to partner with organizations that would ultimately do them. So like, I don't know, John, do you want to answer that?
Yeah, I think what I would say, Katie, is that it would be highly unlikely that a city endorsed or initiated project is partner free. It's most likely that one of our community partners is going to come to Emily's shop or contact my office and say, look, we have an opportunity here. We can't cobble this together without some additional help, and it has to happen fast. And again, in almost all of these cases that I can think of as examples, there's been a partnership. The bridge is an exception just because we had the resources and had always intended to just sort of rescue it, hold it until we could find a partner to take it and continue to operate it with affordability. So it probably seems a little scary. Oh, well, the city's getting the lion's share of this. I think you probably want us to be the partner in whatever the program is, to take some of the risk as well, as a function of whatever the emergency is.
Paul, and then I have an example too.
Yeah, thanks. And I guess this will be germane, because I just want to kind of echo what I heard from Katie. And I just know that from some of the work I've done in the affordable housing world, on a smaller scale, things pop up very fast, and they're not big dollar projects. And a matter of a couple of tens of thousands of dollars might be all that's needed to bridge some gap and bring a piece of property into permanent affordability. But you're competing with private developers against that. And the timelines are very short, but the dollar amounts are also relatively small. So I applaud the idea of keeping a reserve fund open to address those projects. But I do confess to a little bit of concern about restricting that to something like a city initiated project, where we're just adding sort of administrative hurdles to these organizations that are trying to make something happen very fast. in competition with private development money, which has none of these restrictions. So I would encourage the group to keep some small amount of money available for very fast turnarounds and with a minimum administrative overhead. That's more of a comment than a question.
Can I actually follow up with that question too? I guess I'm curious, would the city have to be a partner if somebody needed emergency money for something, or could they just endorse it? Could a private person come, kind of like Paul was describing?
Mhm.
And so the city wouldn't have to necessarily be a partner, just
Right.
bring the project forward too.
Yeah, the example I wanted to provide is actually what spurred the innovation round. So a project, and this might be what Paul is talking about, a project came to us in the summer and they needed like maybe $15,000. And because we didn't have administrative policies yet and all those pieces, and because of how we've communicated how we'll currently administer these funds, we told them that they would know and that they would have to wait and apply. But in this new policy, they would essentially be able to notify us, and then we would discuss the details and things like that. And then we could bring that to you all. But it would not necessarily include us as a partner, especially for something like that that's really small, but that we would be bringing it to you on behalf of them or in partnership with them, even if we're not a broker or a partner in it, but we would be initiating those is really what I meant by that, if that helps clarify it. So it's not the housing authority. I'll just use Lori as an example. I hope that's okay. It's not the housing authority coming to you all and saying, hey, I have a project. It's starting with us and then discussing that and then us bringing that with you, to you. And then I saw John and then Will.
So one of the things I might suggest is I think the language is creating some tension, and I think we might be able to tweak the tension by changing the language. And I think we could say something to the effect of the reserve balance. Sorry, I'm old. The reserve balance will be held why don't we, let's try, the reserve balance will be held for urgent or emergent acquisitions that will preserve or protect affordability for residents. Applications will be vetted administratively and brought to the Oversight Committee.
You can keep talking.
I think that may be it, actually, Emily, if that clarifies. You all tell me whether it clarifies or muddies. I think this fundamentally, this is an emergency fund that allows folks to skip the application process because it's just going to take too long and the opportunity will be lost. The project can be brought to staff. Staff can evaluate it and bring a recommendation to this committee, and committee can make its recommendation.
I see a thumbs up from Paul. How does that work for others? Thanks, John. That's really helpful. Will?
One thing that I think would just be helpful for me and perhaps for others, can you remind, like, I know we're saying 20%. What is the total balance of the trust fund right now?
It's $3.1 million, which will be available to make awards from Here, I'll
Okay.
go to it, but
And
the
does-
20% is $634,800.
And available award balance equals total balance, right? Like those, we should use those terms interchange. It's not like we make a decision, well, there's 3.4, but we only want to make available 3 million. Do I have that correct?
Yeah.
Okay, got it.
I mean, that's for you to discuss, but if you're not putting in the reserve balance and you're not making it available for competitive cycles, I
What
would
else are you
ask,
doing?
what is it doing?
Yep. Just want to make sure I understand it. And so the only thing that I would maybe add to that language is just something to the effect of it cannot wait till the next review cycle, like the next application cycle. Like, I just think urgent needs to be defined a little bit better. And I don't want to over define it so that it would restrict applications. But I think what we're talking about here is it simply could not wait for the next application cycle. And I think we could have staff determine that. And then that's part of staff's recommendation to the committee, is just clarifying why this cannot wait till the next application round.
Thanks. I added that language.
Great.
So
And
then
then-
there's also a follow-up. Sorry, Will. There's also a follow-up for me that I would need to create the administrative process, and then I would share that with you all.
And do we think, I'm guessing the answer is no, but if it is like 600,000 some dollars, I would err on the side of increased flexibility, but do we want to think about a dollar threshold that would be better reserved for the actual full application period? I mean, the example you gave was like 15 grand, but you know, I could imagine there could be an urgent with some of these multifamily developments, you might need $600,000 to make it happen. So I think the answer is no, but just want to pose that as a question to consider.
Katie?
I think it gives more flexibility by not having a dollar amount associated with it. And I think it's something that we can always kind of take care of while we're doing the discussions about it. But I think it's better to have it more broad than limited.
Christine?
I agree with Katie. I think that the story and our journey is going to change, and leaving that flexibility will allow us to respond to what's happening in the community better.
Thanks. Okay, so do we have any more revisions to this, or are you comfortable moving forward? Okay, great. Also, Mats Larson, I see that you have your hand raised. Is your comment about this section, or is it about the innovation round feedback? Do I have to make you, Zoe, do I have to make Mats
I just
Yeah.
clicked it. He should be
Oh,
able-
okay, thanks. Thank you.
Yeah, Matt Larson, Ward 3, thanks for allowing me to speak. My question was regarding the designation of urgent. Last time I checked, we're still in a housing crisis, and we have been for a while. And this last round, we missed 2 projects as far as I can tell, and there was a lot of discussion revolving around Engage Missoula, and also a reference to my City Cloud as the application portal for this for these projects. I think it could be a little bit more clear where to actually apply for these things, as opposed to like hopping and skipping around from Affordable Housing Trust Fund to Engage Missoula and whatever. I just never even heard of City Cloud, and I can't find anything when I Google City Cloud. So I was just wondering, yeah, where is the portal to actually apply, and what is the criteria to make something urgent? It doesn't really make sense to me to have staff go over something that there's no time to go over. I think it would make more sense to just kind of be able to put these right in front of the oversight committee or the trust fund stewards themselves and let them figure it out. if they are truly in fact urgent. But I think we're starting to see the repercussions of this really what I would call a slush fund here, because we haven't dispersed anything more than $26,000, and it's urgent that we do these projects, but yet there's nothing lined up. We've effectively boxed out small and medium scale development, and it's only large developers that get a crack at this now. And so I'm just really hesitant to see a positive outcome from the city middlemaning the real estate market bubble that it's effectively created. But again, I'm just the layman here.
Thanks for your feedback, Mads. We'll also take public comment at the end too, if there are at the end of this section, if there are other perspectives or public comment. I'm not going to go into the whole city cloud right now, but Matt's, I can follow up with you on that. It's an internal process that we use. So applicants notified me that they were going to apply, and then we set them up with it's essentially a folder where they submit their applications. Okay. Can we, is there anybody who wants to respond, or anyone, are we ready to move to the next section? Okay, great. Okay, so tonight we're setting the priorities for the program and project types, consumer housing services, new construction of homes, and preservation. And I did a page for each one. So I guess actually I had a question. Do you want to set the amounts that you want to spend or that you want to allocate to these priorities first, or do you want to do the priorities first?
I apologize, I didn't raise my hand.
That's fine.
I offer up that we take your lead on this, Emily. We're short on time and have a lot of work to do. So whichever way you think would be most efficient and help us through the process, I would appreciate you going there.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
I would recommend you start with the priorities, and then I will fill in the data section from the landscape assessment and other things, unless that there's something that you pull up that you want to especially target. Then I'll make a note in that, and then I'll do all that section later. Will?
Yeah, just to get into it. My question, as I was looking at this ahead of time regarding consumer housing services, is how much do we expect to meet the need just through our community development block grant and home funds, given that a lot of times, especially because with public services, you can kind of, you can fund that way, versus should we think about the trust fund as just being used for development?
Great question. They've made the decision to prioritize the, I don't remember which one has public services. Home,
CDBG.
maybe? CDBG, thanks. They've made the decision to prioritize development projects through that. And so really the available funding primarily is through the trust fund.
Okay, that helps. Thanks.
All right, so what are some priorities for consumer housing services? Paul and then Riley.
Yeah, so a quick question. When you say priorities, do you mean just generally, or are you talking about this list of program and project types that you proposed? What exactly are you looking for here?
Yeah, good question. I think for this one especially, it's looking at, and for all of the, would be around the project types that are listed. So like for consumer housing services, a statement of priority could be, and this is just an example, it's not to lead you, but I just want to give some guidance. It could be that you want to prioritize public service, public service activities including the projects listed under consumer housing services, and that those are, eligible to reapply over years or things like that. Like those could be some of the examples of your priorities in that section. Whereas like when you get into construction and preservation, that might be where you're setting AMI priorities, things like that. If that helps to make sense. John?
So Emily and Katie, this is a heavy lift for a committee to grind through. I'd suggest that we that staff prepare some of these statements for us to have at.
Okay.
Rather than trying to do it in the 40 minutes that remain of our time tonight. I just don't think we're going to get. I think the priority probably needs to be let's get the allocation sorted.
Okay.
Does that seem reasonable?
In some ways, I think I need to have some guidance from the committee. In part that I want to be sure that I'm not leading your work. And this is a project of yours. So I can absolutely take a stab at this, or a crack at it, but I also want to just be reflective that it reflects your priorities. So I can write statements and things like that, but I do need to know if you have priorities in these areas, what they are.
And I certainly don't want to eliminate that option for folks. But I think getting all of us to write this tonight is going to be a heavy lift.
Yeah, we can do bullet points tonight and I can write the sentences, but I need to know where you're starting, and maybe the right place to start is the allocation, and that will guide you to talk more about why your priorities are the way they are, and then we can frame it that way. How does that sound?
I am one voice here, just tossing out an idea or two. So
Okay.
I'll go anyway. I'll go any way anyone wants to go.
Oh, great. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt you.
Not at all.
Riley and then Will.
Yeah, can we see the list of the program and project types again, please?
Yep.
So I'm looking at the consumer housing services. I do want to touch upon the centralized housing solution fund, and maybe this is just coming from a point of perspective here. As far as I can see, a lot of these programs deal with either support or education or programs that assist in broadening people's knowledge around housing. Whereas the centralized housing solution fund is a program that directly helps people get into housing, whether it's paying for rent or application fees, especially for those who can't necessarily make some of those payments themselves. And that's just one use of the fund. So I feel like that's definitely something that should be a priority, at least for getting renewed. And I'm definitely interested in learning more about the other services as well.
Will?
I was just going to suggest, is part of the prioritization conversation just prioritizing between the various buckets even? I think based on all the presentations we've got over the past several months, it's development of new housing is the number one thing that I think we need to be focused on. And so maybe the idea of thinking about budget and allocation does make sense in that regard. And then I'll just plus one to what Riley said. I do like the fact that the centralized housing fund actually places people in housing. That being said, if we're not going to be funding those public services through other funding sources that they're traditionally funded for, I think those are really important services and do need to be it's almost like a statement of priority, something around the fact of make sure there's no drop off in service for high performing programs that we know make a difference for homeowners and renters.
Okay, so I'm gonna facilitate quickly, and then I'll take the two questions I see. So there's the proposal to move to the budget, which I think will help prioritize how we write the statements. And I want to just make sure that works for people. Okay, and then I think Paul first and then Katie.
Yeah, if we're moving the budget, I'll keep this quite brief. Regarding the housing services, I am relatively unenthusiastic about education and counseling. I think it's a supply problem, and it's not an education and counseling problem. It's as much as maybe this perhaps what the centralized housing solutions fund is, but things like a consolidated rental application system are a little more exciting for me.
Thanks, Paul. Katie?
Just a quick logistics question. When we set the budget, or is it just for the unified round or is it for both rounds?
It'll be for both rounds.
Both rounds. And then can we change it at all between those two rounds?
I think that will depend on what gets allocated.
Okay.
And then if it doesn't get allocated in the unified round, it would go to the second round.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we're gonna start. We can start with the unified round, or we could do the full balance together. It's up to you. I think if you want to start with the unified round, this is my recommendation. That will help you inform the next. Actually, no, let's just do the full round. Christina, I saw your hand, but did you unraise it?
No, that's okay. You actually walked right into where my question was going.
Okay, great. So where do you want to start? Paul or Will?
I'll just toss something out there. This is an arbitrary number to start, but at least to get us going, that if we allocated 80% to actual housing construction, that would be $1,046,000. I think that's the minimum probably. And wait, sorry, remind me. And then 20% gets remain for the reserve balance. Maybe we need to punch that in.
Yeah, let's just punch it in. Yeah.
So we know. So maybe it's something less than that, and we want to reserve some small percentage for services. But that would
Oh wait,
be,
no, that's for the total.
Yeah.
Shoot. Okay, I have to do the math. Hold on. I'll work on it. I saw Paul.
Yeah, just a super quick question. Are these recommendations or are these numbers binding?
So these would be, well, one of the things you need to give me guidance on is your contingency. So for example, if you don't get $1 million in housing construction programs, then what do you want us to do? Do you want us to leave it in the balance, or do you want us to award it to other projects that were high performing and scored well? So that's one of the questions. But I think for the most part, like we wouldn't dip into the second round's funding in the unified round, if that makes sense.
Maybe a little bit. Maybe I'm not totally following you. I guess what I'm wondering is, if we're setting dollar amounts here, like are we bound? Like if we're oversubscribed in one category with good projects and we're undersubscribed with another, are we going to be turning down good projects because of this percentage breakdown that we set for ourselves? Or is this just sort of a thematic, like this is roughly where we want to spend our money?
That's your contingency plan. That's what you need to tell us.
Okay.
Christine?
Emily, I'm just going to ask if you could zoom in your screen a little bit.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine.
Okay, see, Will has a question.
yeah, I was just wondering, so preservation would be the example we talked about before, right? Like a low-income housing tax credit development. Do they have to be segmented? Like, is there anything about, does it make sense administratively that it's got to be construction and preservation separate, or could it be one funding bucket for each? But it's like we're leveraging the scoring criteria to tell us what's going to have the highest impact in terms of like development, or because preserving 200 units, constructing 200 new units, you know, it's not exactly apples to apples, but it's pretty close. And so just curious if it has to be separated.
Is that to me or to the group?
I guess I would start with you, or maybe your answer is we get to decide that, but.
I think it comes back to your contingency again, probably.
Okay.
And I want to hear what others think too.
Okay. I'll just voice my opinion. If it's up to us, I would say it's like maybe we put slightly more into new construction, some allotment for preservation, but the contingency is like both of those could go back and forth to fund each other if they're not fully allocated.
Okay, Christine.
I apologize. I was taking notes, and Will, I misunderstood your point initially. So I do agree with the contingency. Well, actually, I don't know. There's part of me that's wondering preservation costs compared to new construction, which is something that I'm not well informed on. But also, I think I'm wondering about the long-term sustainability of our planet, of already built homes and housing units that could be preserved by using fewer products, services, capacities to lean into a more sustainable future, as well as new construction. I think I want to keep the two compartmentalized a little bit.
Is that John and then Paul and then Will?
Thanks. So, I think that Paul and Katie are going to have a better sense of this. There is no cheaper housing than housing that is already built. So if we can preserve that's likely the least expensive affordable housing that we're going to be able to create or maintain. There, I believe, however, is limited. That stock is limited. So if we want to get, and I agree with Paul, this is an inventory problem. I would suggest some lion's share of allocation is about construction, and a considerably lesser share is about housing preservation. Remembering that we have that 600,000 reserve that we could apply for those emergent issues. So I would tend to go light on the preservation just because I don't think there are that many opportunities, and go heavy on I would go heavy on the construction.
So if you went with Will's original recommendation of 80% of the remaining balance, that's $836,960 to construction. Just want to name that actual amount. And then I see Paul and then Will, I think is the.
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments. I'm sorry, I have a dog barking in the background. Yeah, I think John is completely correct that the cheapest form of housing is going to be existing housing, and particularly many projects will just require a subsidy to make affordability and maybe not the full purchase price. But Christine, to your point, the energy performance and environmental indoor air quality of new construction versus old construction is so vastly different that honestly replacing homes with modern energy code probably has a net benefit environmentally in the long run. And then to Will's point, yeah, I'm a little hesitant to draw a hard line between preservation and construction. And I would like for that to be fairly porous just as the quality of projects becomes available, personally. Thanks.
Christine and then Katie and then John.
So then perhaps an appropriate contingency, if we're going to put these funds in one bucket, is to state that when a preservation opportunity comes in, it has first opportunity for funds ahead of new construction.
Katie, and then I think John put his hand down. So then it's Will and then Lori.
Just in the interest of time on getting some numbers in there, I guess I would suggest maybe 70% in new construction and then moving, closer to 20% in the housing preservation and maybe 10, then see what the numbers are looking like to divide up between consumer housing services and kind of look at just those numbers and how we could tweak them around.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to do that while other people talk, just for the purpose of getting some things in here to move.
Thank you.
And then Lori.
Oh.
Oh, sorry, Will, you put your hand down.
That's
so
okay. I
didn't
put my
think you
hand
wanted
down
to
too
talk.
quickly. I was just going to say that I understand your point, Christine, about preservation. The only thing is, I wouldn't want to lock us in that it would have to go to preservation. I think that should still be informed by what's the best project that comes in. So I think
Agreed.
if we're ever in a situation where it's like all things being equal, maybe. But I just think my perspective is like, let's trust the committee to evaluate all those things based on the scoring criteria we're approving as part of this. And so, yeah, that was my only point. And then I like what Katie just suggested, and we can look at those numbers. One question I was going to have, Emily, is maybe if we can pressure test whatever allocation we put in for like consumer services, if we think that matches what the historical demand has been or not. And I'm sympathetic to the point Paul made too. Like, just because we funded it before doesn't mean we need to keep funding at those levels. But
Lori.
Yeah, I just want to, my comment would be that I think that we already have the reserve fund that can handle those preservation issues that might come up suddenly, and where we want to really keep that, preserve that housing stock already subsidized or already affordable housing. And the priority right now is just creating units. It has to be new construction of units. I mean, when I look at our voucher holders who for the first time in 25 years are not able to find a unit to rent even with their voucher, I know that we just need new construction. And so I like the idea that we're starting to look at prioritizing the new construction, with the understanding that preservation of affordable housing is also important, but that's kind of why we put that reserve fund into place. So I think we're pretty well covered there. I do like the idea of having the fluidity between the preservation and the new construction. I like that for a contingency.
Thanks, Lori. Okay, so this is how your numbers look right now. 104,620 going to consumer housing services, 732,340 going to housing construction, 209,000 going to housing preservation, and then your reserve balance at 261,000. Will?
Emily, can you just remind me what the incentive program is that we're not funding right now in this scenario?
Yeah, eventually it's still in development, so that's okay for this round. That it won't be, and it won't actually be a round, it will be something that's administered by our agency. It's in the housing policy to create a voluntary incentives program to incent developers to add affordability to their units. And so that will need to be included in the budget, but we're currently still developing it. It'll probably be ready for some partners in the summer. So it's okay to skip it in the unified round, in the budget for the unified round.
I'll just say at first glance, it seems to me we could put more into new construction, given it's a combined like $470,000 that would be available for preservation. My thought would be like maybe another 100,000 going into new construction, and we'd still have $370,000 that could be used for preservation.
Riley?
I just wanted to echo Will's statement, especially if I'm understanding what Lori said correctly about the funding that's available for preservation and the fact that we're really just running into the issue that we don't have enough homes in our community right now.
Thank you. So Will, you're saying a total between the reserve and the housing preservation would be 370?
Yeah, so like we
So
could even
reduce
just
this
round.
by 100.
Correct. And then add another 100,000 to new construction.
Okay. Thanks. I
Mhm.
had to really think through that.
All good.
How to do that in real time. Okay. How does this look for the unified round? Yep, Paul.
Yeah, appreciate the exercise here. I guess I'm a little hesitant to take the housing preservation down too low. I mean, 110,000 may not go that far for the right opportunity. And I really want to keep the reserve balance robust personally. If I were going to shave a little money anywhere, it might be off the consumer housing services. Because I'm still not totally certain what those are going to fund. And there's already a lot of pretty active consumer counseling and education programs going on in the vicinity. So that's just my opinion.
Paul, just to clarify, those programs that are currently going on, they're not going to be eligible for CDBG funding as they have been in the past. So if they need continued funding, they would come to the trust fund.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Does that change your perspective or no?
No, not really. I guess, yeah, 110 for preservation does seem a little slim. I mean, that's going to be 4 or 5 units maybe. So I wouldn't mind seeing that a little bit higher. I understand that new construction, of course, is more expensive, and I think it makes sense to overweight that category, but this seems like that's cutting it a little thin to me.
Will?
I was just going to say on the consumer services, my recollection, Emily, is I feel like sometimes the whole allotment for public services through the CDBG funding was maybe 25 grand, maybe 35 grand is what we used to support. And so I don't know what it looks like today, but I would be inclined to agree with Paul that 100,000 is probably much more than we need. The only exception I would say is if with the solutions fund, or I forget exactly what it's called, like if making sure there's enough, like if we funded it at 25,000 this time, assuming we might want to continue to seed that, but I don't know, something in maybe like the 50 to 60 range would be more appropriate. And then I'm up for Paul's point on the preservation fund. The only thing I would point out is this is just for the first 6-month period. There's going to be another 370,000 for preservation in the next 6-month period based on what we're seeing with the math here.
So if you brought your consumer housing services down to 60,000, you have a balance of 44,000 to put somewhere. Paul?
Sorry, that was a residual hand up. I was just sticking into housing preservation. And to the extent that there's a larger allotment coming in the future, I wonder why we, and apologies if this has been addressed and I missed it, why we wouldn't kind of front load that and do the larger allocation in the first round.
We don't have it available. We're waiting for the sale of the Scott Street parcel, and that will dictate the timing of the summer round.
Okay, appreciate that.
Okay, how does this look? You ready to move on to the next round? Okay, great. I'm taking Katie's nod as a yes, and we're going forward. So what would you like to do in the next round? You have $1.4 million available. in your balance. Yep, Katie.
I think I would probably lean close to the same allocation we had as far as percentage wise, like, closer to 70 to 75% in the new construction, and then kind of breaking it down from there with maybe a little less in preservation just because there's more in the reserve balance. Thank you.
Thanks. John?
Based on Will's recollection around our CDBG allocation around housing services, I'd zero it out for this round.
Okay.
Are you saying zero out consumer housing services, John?
Yep.
That would make sense to me too, because it's likely that they would apply in this first round.
I think that sounds right too. Just want to ask one more question about the Central Solutions Fund. Is our idea that if they applied for that in the unified round, that they're asking for a 12-month allocation?
They asked for an allocate. They think they'll spend that by June. And so then they could potentially apply again in the unified round for their next allocation if they need it.
So
they have other funding as well.
So 25,000 between now and June is like 9 months. So yeah, that seems like a good idea that we wouldn't need to fund consumer housing services in the second round.
And contracts for the unified round, I know it'll sound weird. They won't start until July 1 because we'll be through the process probably around May, and then we'll start them around on July 1, to align with the CDBG and home award cycle, because many of these will probably be dual grantees. Sorry, there's so many factors that I forget to tell you all about. Christine?
I just need to clarify, if we were in a situation where an organization from the consumer housing section of how we're dividing our funds came in with a need, they could still be considered in the reserve funds, right? We used the word projects, but in our language, but they could still be considered, correct? Okay, then
I would say so.
Okay, then I think zero in this round is fine.
So that would leave you with 298,600. I would like to make a pitch for the incentives that these will also help with development of housing. And I think that we will be ready to have that open by when this would be available. And so I would like to have some budget in the incentives program. What I will say is if for some reason our project design and development phase is slowed, then we could write that into the contingency that you would just put it into another bucket. John?
So Emily, can you give us an example of an incentive?
Yeah, so an example could be to help, what we're working with our consultant right now on is a potential could be like to help subsidize a land cost that would then, in exchange for that subsidy, would mean that there's affordable units in the apartment or home. And then another example would be to subsidize development fees for the applicant, and then in exchange for that we would get a portion of affordability.
So I really like your pitch, and I think those are fine examples of incentives that are practical. So what's our balance? Sorry,
298,600. 298,600.
We don't seem to be moving. I want to say I would move that we put $200,000 in there, but I'm going to throw it at the wall.
Does anyone want to second that? Well,
that?
we're not at the motion stage
Right.
Probably yet.
Right.
I saw Lori and then
I just have a question. You mentioned that helping with the purchase of land for a developer would be an incentive. Is the purchase of land for new construction of homes, is that not included? I mean, is that not an eligible cost for just under the new construction part of it?
It's allowable, Lori.
Okay.
So that is absolutely allowable for new construction. But this project, the incentives program, runs outside of the competitive cycles. It's basically an administrative process that we will run once it's finished being developed. So really, I just need it in the budget. I don't really need it in this round.
Yeah, I get it. Thank you so much.
Riley, and then Will.
Yeah, thank you, Emily. And so with these incentives that be being offered to developers and everything, would that be like an agreement that's between them and the city for holding to the standard of affordable housing and so on?
Yep.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I think that would be a really good idea, especially thinking in terms of what Missoula's future looks like in regards to affordable housing. Yeah.
Thanks. Will, and I want to do a time check that we have 10 minutes left. And we have one member with of the community with their hand raised. So,
okay. I just given that like the incentive program is like not launched, and I think like the question I would have is like, how much incentive does it take to get one unit of affordable housing, and like try to just think through how does this actually make a difference? 200,000 seems like a rather large outlay to me for something that we don't know what shape it's going to take. So if there was a way, like I could think of two options, like is there some kind of like, we allocate like 50,000 initially, see how it goes, and then can, there can be like a, if we see that it's actually getting spent, it's seeing results, we allocate more. Or to an earlier question, is there a way we can revisit the AHTF round when we know more about how the incentive program is going to work?
You could not resolve. I don't know the word, but you could revise. That's the word. You could revise your allocation plan, or you could write. What I would recommend is that you write it into the contingency, because by then we'll know where we are in the development of it. If it's not going to be launched until the next fund cycle is available, we would just wait. We wouldn't keep the money in the balance.
Have we done any, sorry, I know we're running low on time, but have we done any scoping about like how much budget we think this would take?
Not at this point. We're still in the development of the incentives, and Will, I just want to name that we're working on percentages. So if we provide you with an incentive, you have to provide us with a percentage of affordability. And we're still in that phase with our consultant.
Okay.
I would be comfortable. I mean, I defer to you all, but I think $100,000 for the first incentives program approach works well for me. Just knowing that I'm going to administer it and that it also will not start until the probably summer. And then we'll be in a new budget cycle, and I can communicate that. So I think there's process for that if you're comfortable with 100.
I would be comfortable with 100 there, and then maybe we can move the rest of the balance, that 200,000, up to housing preservation. I know we are short on time. Do we want to maybe do 2 more minutes of talking and then take public comment?
Yeah, that sounds great. Thanks, Katie. Paul?
Yeah, quick question. I mean, to what extent are we going to have the ability to modify this on the fly? I would just hate to turn down a good project because we hit some arbitrary limits we set for ourselves 6 months ago.
I think that goes to the contingency plan, which is what we'll establish. Okay. I'm guessing next meeting is when we've run out of money here, we'll go to what the contingency says.
Okay, I think I've asked the question the same 2 different ways and I got the same answer. So thanks.
So I think you're right that the contingency plan is where you'll do that. I can do some work to make some recommendations and things like that for language, and then you can respond to the language. I think there will be an ask from me for you to do some work between the meetings, because originally I was very ambitious about where we would get with this. I originally planned that we would post the public comment on next Tuesday, and then you would come back to the meeting in December and review the final draft. But it sounds like what you want is to have a product to respond to and then do that in December. And then I think what we'll need to do is do the public comment period right after the meeting in December. And then I'll have to think about, I think we could finalize it in January and still be able to run the round. But I may need to come back and ask you to do some work, because we're planning to post the materials in December, and we may not be ready to do that if the allocation plan isn't done. So is there a commitment from people to do some work between meetings, or potentially do an emergency meeting if you need to pull together this? Jerry, and then John.
I would think that would be great to do the work so that we can get it out sooner and get that comment period going.
Okay, thanks, Jerry. John?
Emily, how did you establish the comment period? Is that in ordinance?
No, well, it is included in the ordinance that we'll seek community feedback on these documents and pieces like that, and then it's just been a value of ours.
Yeah, I don't think you need a month.
Oh, I was planning to do 2 weeks.
I think you could do a week all day and be fine.
Okay. But we still have the issue of the goal was to finalize it in December so that we could post the application. So we'll still need to do that. Or what I'm going to propose is that I'm going to take a stab at this, give you all a period of time to respond, make edits. I'll go back, do that, and then I'll need you to give me the green light to post it so that we can review the final draft in the December meeting. Okay,
yep.
Great. So that's what we'll do. Thanks. So if there isn't anything more, then we'll go ahead to public comment. And it looks like Matt's, you have your hand raised.
Yes, Matt Larson, Ward 3. Thanks for allowing me to speak. I would just go back to an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. I think that the incentives program doesn't make sense to me as it's worded, in that basically in this market right now, with $100,000 even doesn't make any sort of dent in any sort of affordable housing unit. But I think what could be allocated more heavily, again, is like preservation. And that's the stuff that you need to be able to speed line into this. Like the incentives program just sounds like an extra to the regular application process. It doesn't make any sense to fund it all to me. But again, this is like in a very elaborate and very timed like thing and all this stuff. We got to be very like calculated, but $100,000 could keep someone from being evicted from their house. It could keep a veteran in their home. It could keep an old person on Social Security disability income, or who's already supplemented by the state in their home. It could keep people who are already in our housing units that do exist in their home because of inflation, because of all types of stuff, with reductions from the state funding for Social Security. And so I would implore people, the citizens, right, of this oversight committee, to actually help the citizens, as opposed to helping developers who are supposed to I don't know, the incentive thing doesn't make any sense to me. That's my own personal opinion. Again, just a layman here, down in the not in the ivory towers with the people in the city making this policy. So I'd implore the people that are representing the citizens and purporting to use an ounce of prevention as opposed to a pound of cure, which is all hypothetical at this point with forced inclusionary zoning. And we've seen that backfire at 4th and Ronald already, where units are selling for $800,000. That is not affordable housing, yet there has to be 20% affordable housing there. It's kind of ridiculous. So I think we could use this money, if it's in a trust fund, actually we could allocate it in a timely manner and to make differences to actual community members as opposed to hypothetical developments. Or if the opportunities don't come along, we should allocate it out to the people.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you. We're at 8. So I'm going to do some follow-up and get this out to you in the next couple of days. And then I'll give you a timeline, probably a week to review. And then we'll go from there. So I would say if you have priorities or contingencies that you brought with you to this prep meeting that you can send me. Otherwise, I'm going to use data in the landscape assessment to set your priorities that you can respond to.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks, Emily.
Thanks.
I
Thank you,
move
Emily.
we adjourn.
Yep. Motion.
Yeah. Oh yeah, someone needs a motion to adjourn.
Is there a second?
I second. Jerry does.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye.